Step one of our policy process is defining and understanding the problem, right? So we define the problem in the following ways. How do we know it's a problem? These are the sort of questions we have to ask ourselves. We look at the literature. How did the experts frame this problem? We know intuitively as policy analysts or as aspiring policy analysts that some things are problems or some things are not right, which is why we're conducting an analysis. And we need to begin with what people are already saying about this particular problem, either where we are or elsewhere. Most policy problems are not unique. They are being faced by others who have written about them in newspapers sometimes, or in actual formal analyses. So we have to look at the way in which the experts frame this problem and how they tackled it, right? And in particular, we need to look at data. It's very important not to go on anecdotal data or instinct when you're a policy analyst just yet. You need to collect data from different people, quantitative data and qualitative data, right? So let's look at our policy and see how we define this. How do we know there's a problem? The first thing we have to do is collect evidence, right? So if you look at the bottom, I have some references. Okay, these are some reports that I took out statistics to look at this problem, right? So despite New York City raising the K through 12 graduation rates by 17.8% from 46.5 in 2005 to 64.2 in 2014, only 35% of graduated students, so that's high school, are considered college ready. Okay? This compared to 40% in New York State and the national, which is the US, average of 42.6%. Alright, so what does this mean, right? So it's a lot of numbers. What this is basically saying is two things. New York City has more young people graduating from high school, right? So it's increased 17.8% or more young people are graduating from high school. But only 35% of those young people are considered college ready. In other words, they can get into college. We'll define these words in a moment, right? So that's the policy problem. And this is lower, right? This is much lower than the state average. In other words, in some countries we call this a province, is 40%. So New York is 35%. The state average is 40%. The American average is 42.6%. So what this is saying in a nutshell, what this data is telling us, is that despite New York City doing great in terms of increasing the number of young people graduating from high school, they're still not preparing them for university. They're way below the state average and the national average. Okay, this is the use of data to tell us that this is defining the problem, right? We're getting an idea in terms of numbers. The second thing we do is we look at experts. How do they frame this problem? All right, so they often frame this with the idea of public and private goods. Let me give you an example. A public good is like a road. A road it gives everyone, the public, benefits, right? A private good is like having your own car on that road. Not everyone can use your car. And unless you give someone else a ride, they're not really going to derive any benefit from your car. But everyone is deriving benefit from this public good known as the road. Okay? So how experts frame school and frame this problem is they're saying that the more young people who can access college, the better it is for everyone. The more engineers, doctors, teachers, and the like we have. All right? So Byam and Payer, remember, I'm drawing on experts to define this problem for me. They say in their report, they say that there's a positive relationship between higher levels of educational attainment and increased personal earnings. In other words, the more education, the more you earn. Better health, the more educated you are, the more healthier you are. And reductions in social costs. Social costs, for example, include things like accidents because people can't read road signs. Social costs include things like drugs, things like cancer, and these sort of things that come as a result of not necessarily having a low level of education, right? Not knowing the effects of fatty foods, for example, not knowing the effects of some of these negative things, not being able to read the labels of things, for example. So what Byam and Payer are saying is that the higher the educational level, the greater good it is for everyone. All right? So that's how they reframe this problem. So how is it being measured, right? Cook and Hartle are saying college enrollment and graduation rates are the way in which they measure this. How many young people are going from high school to college, and how many of those people in college are graduating? So that's the first way they define this. They measure this problem. The second way they measure this problem is cost. How much is it costing? How much money is the city of New York losing as a result of our young people not having access to higher jobs, right? How much money in tax, for example. And then they're measuring it by ethnicity, by race, and immigration status. They're saying how many people of color, how many people from other countries, how many people of a specific ethnicity, and in other words, how many people by gender are able to access this particular service, right? So those are important elements. So as we're thinking about policy, let us go back to our first slide. The first thing we need to know when we're defining and understanding the problem is, how do we know it's a problem? Remember, we collected data. We looked at how other people are defining this problem, and we use numbers to define this problem, right? We looked at the literature. How did the experts frame this problem? And then we looked at data. How is it being measured? And these create the foundation of this analysis. We begin by really understanding the problem so that we can begin to understand why this problem is actually happening. And then in the next steps, we begin to unpack it and look at the ways in which we can find solutions to it.